in the grand halls of the Clark estate, with sunlight filtering through sweeping drapes and casting gold upon marble floors, Kayla Harper stepped down the sweeping staircase with steady grace. At 22, her fresh hope for a perfect family radiated from her green-eyed gaze, a beacon in the otherwise austere household. She carried an air of warmth that contrasted sharply with the cold opulence surrounding her. Every step echoed against polished stone, whispering a promise of gentle care. In her soft smile lived the dream she had of motherhood, dreams she nurtured quietly within her heart. The heavy silence of the mansion yielded to her quiet confidence as she approached the living room where young Leanne Clark sat fidgeting beside a polished walnut table, coloring in sheets of paper. Each stroke of his crayon held a longing for the love he had never known. Leanne, only 4, looked up when Kayla entered, his tiny heart recognizing something he couldn't name yet, but knew he needed. He clutched his stuffed rabbit, Bob, with small fingers trembling slightly. The mansion's emptiness weighed on him like a dress too big. His first word had been Bob, and he said it still, a testament to the one comforting presence in his lonely world. Kayla sank to her knees beside him, her soft voice coaxing him into more colors, more joy. Slowly, a hesitant giggle escaped him, surprising them both. It was within that delicate moment that Kayla first glimpsed the fragile seed of hope blossoming in his wide blue eyes. Her heart swelled. This was more than a job, it was a calling. Far above, in the hidden recesses of his private study, Andrew Clark peered from behind his desk, framed by shelves of engineering awards and corporate accolades. His expression was a mask, pain hardened by years of grief and industry battles. The man known as the Devouring Lion remained perched atop a throne of glass and steel, but inside lay rubble. Every dream he had held close had crumbled when Suzanne died. His wife's death had hollowed him out, transforming laughter into discipline, kindness into demand. He forced himself to focus on spreadsheets, not children. Today, though, something tugged at him, a soft chuckle from downstairs, like music he had forgotten he loved. Intrigued despite himself, Andrew rose and walked toward the source, curiosity battling the ice within. Down below, Kayla led Leanne through a play of shadows and sunlight, teaching him gentle finger dances, naming each color in tender tones until his fingertips paused over new shapes. With each new word he beamed, and his laughter struck Andrew's heart like a key unlocking an old rusty door. Watching them, hidden by carved balusters, Andrew felt something shift, something fragile stirring that he had never allowed himself to acknowledge. It was tenderness, and shame followed. Shame that he'd denied his son this for so long. He turned away quickly, unwilling to stare directly at hope, yet it clung to him stubbornly. At dinner that evening, Kayla prepared simple comfort food, roasted vegetables and soup that filled the halls with gentle aromas. Leanne ate ravenously. Hunger wasn't only for food but for care. Andrew sat at the head of the long table, plates gleaming unnaturally in the cavernous room. The silence pressed on until Kayla gently invited Leanne to tell his favorite part of the day. His reply, "I laughed with Kayla," floated across the table. Andrew's throat tightened. He swallowed the lump there, suppressing an ache he hadn't felt in years. He raised his wine glass and gave a curt nod, his gaze steely but not unkind. In Kayla's calm eyes he saw unwavering commitment, something he'd never given Lien, and never received from anyone. That night, Kayla lay awake on the guest room floor, listening to Lien's soft breathing and imagining the family she'd always dreamed of. Her heart was full but also aching with a tender uncertainty. Everything they shared that day felt sacred. She wondered if Andrew saw her differently now, if beneath the cold shell he might be waking to possibility. Before drifting off, she whispered a prayer. May this child know safety, may his father rediscover joy, and may I bring what their hearts need. If this story has already touched your heart, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the upcoming episodes in this emotional journey. There's so much more to come, and your presence means everything to us. Leave a like, share with someone who still believes in love, and tell us in the comments what kind of stories you'd love to see next. Kayla woke early the next morning, just as she always did. But something felt different inside the Clark mansion. The usual weight of silence that blanketed the house seemed lighter, like a fog lifting after a long storm. It was as if the halls themselves had remembered how to breathe, thanks to the sound of Lien's laughter from the day before. As she walked into the kitchen, the staff seemed less hurried, less cautious. She greeted them with a smile, the same calm smile that Lien had started imitating with uncanny accuracy. As she poured a glass of juice and began making breakfast, she felt something she hadn't expected in a long time: belonging. For a moment, this massive house with marble floors and priceless art didn't feel like a cold museum, but like a home. But then her phone vibrated, and just like that, reality crashed down on her. A message from Alexander. Short, easy. No greeting. No "I miss you." Just a demand. Are you visiting me today or still playing house with the rich guy's kid? Kayla's throat tightened. Alexander hadn't been the same since he got involved in shady affairs at the precinct. He blamed the stress, the corruption he couldn't fight, the bad apples around him. She wanted to believe him. She always had. But over time, his voice lost its tenderness. His texts turned into commands. His presence became a shadow of control. And now, as she looked around at the peaceful morning routine, she felt the contrast so sharply that it burned. In this house, she was respected, needed, cherished. Lien clung to her with genuine affection, and the staff treated her as part of the rhythm of their day. With Alexander, she felt like property. The fear she used to bury with excuses now rose with clarity. She was scared of him, not because he might hurt her with his hands, but because he knew how to twist her heart, guilt her into silence, and now threaten what she loved most. From the top of the stairs, Andrew watched, not like a boss surveying an employee, but like a man who recognized grief when he saw it. He noticed the stillness in Kayla's posture, the way her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the plate. Her green eyes, usually bright and observant, looked dulled, distant. Something had shifted. Quietly, without announcing himself, he descended the stairs. He didn't bark orders or ask about the day's schedule. Instead, he walked into the kitchen, poured a second cup of tea, and set it gently next to her without a word. Kayla turned, startled, meeting his eyes. "Lien won't eat unless you're around," Andrew said, his voice low but steady. "He needs you more than you know." It was the first full sentence he'd spoken to her in weeks. And it wasn't about duties. It was about connection. Later that afternoon, Lien developed a sudden fever. It wasn't dramatic, but it was unusual. And for a child who was always bursting with energy, the shift was alarming. His eyes seemed glazed over, and he didn't want to draw or play with Bob, his stuffed bunny. Kayla, worried, took him to the family pediatrician. After a full checkup, the doctor shook his head. "There's no infection, no physical cause, but I do believe this could be emotional. Maybe stress, or some environment issue he's internalizing." The idea that Lien's body was reflecting the tension around him shattered Kayla. Minutes later, Andrew walked into the clinic, having left an important meeting without hesitation. He saw them through the glass. Kayla, sitting by Lien's side, holding his tiny hand, whispering a lullaby. Something fragile cracked inside him. He didn't speak. He just closed his eyes and, for the first time in years, prayed, "Please don't take anyone else from me." On the drive back, Lien slept quietly in the back seat, wrapped in a soft blue blanket. The silence in the car wasn't heavy this time. It was loaded with unspoken feelings, yet somehow calm. Kayla stared at the road ahead and then finally said, "Do you think I'm overstepping?" Her voice was gentle but firm. Andrew took a long moment before responding. "No. I think he's never had this much love before. I just don't know how to give that kind of love myself." His voice cracked at the end, raw and real. Kayla didn't answer with words. She placed a gentle hand on his forearm and let it linger. He didn't pull away. That small gesture bridged a gap that had seemed insurmountable. That night, after Lien had been tucked into bed, Kayla stepped out onto the wraparound porch. The stars were out in full force, shimmering like thousands of silent watchers in the sky. She held a piece of paper in her hand. Letter. Threat. Alexander had found her apartment and left it on her table. The words were cold and deliberate. "Think twice before replacing me. You think you'll be happy with him. Remember, nothing you love lasts. That includes the boy." The last line made her legs buckle. Yin. He was threatening Lien. Her hands shook as she clutched the letter. Her heartbeat was a thunder in her ears. She didn't cry out loud, she never did, but her tears soaked her cheeks. She had to protect that child no matter what it cost her. Andrew found her there, knees drawn up, the letter in one hand, her phone in the other. Her face glistened with tears in the moonlight. He said nothing at first, just sat beside her, leaving enough space not to startle her. After a few minutes he asked quietly, "It was him, wasn't it?" Kayla nodded. Wordlessly, she handed him the letter. As Andrew read it, his eyes darkened. Not with confusion or shock, but with resolve. Gone was the quiet executive. Gone was the emotionally detached man. In his place was a father, a protector. He folded the letter with precision, stood and said, "This ends now." In that moment, Andrew Clark made a silent vow to himself. He would not let the past repeat itself. Not again. Not on his watch. He spent the rest of the night making calls, discreet but firm. By morning, his team had initiated a process to request Alexander's transfer to a high-security prison in another state. It would take time, but Andrew knew how to pull the right strings. He had influence, power, and now a reason beyond money to use it. For the first time in years, Andrew wasn't driven by business, legacy, or pride. He was driven by something softer but stronger. Something he never thought he'd feel again. The need to protect, care, to rebuild. As the sky turned pale blue, Andrew sat by the window, watching Lien sleep. And in the quietest part of his heart, a question began to echo louder and louder. Was it truly possible to love again, without betraying the memory of the one he lost? The morning after the letter incident, the atmosphere in the Clark mansion was tense. Though no words were exchanged, Andrew barely slept. His thoughts were a battlefield of emotions. Rage, guilt, fear, and something else. Something warm that frightened him even more than the threats of Alexander. For so long, he'd built walls of stone around his heart, burying every tender feeling under layers of work, silence, and solitude. But now, watching Kayla move through the house with quiet grace, seeing the way Lien's face lit up the moment she entered a room, Andrew felt the old walls cracking. And cracks, he knew, meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant danger. Still, the protector in him had awakened. And it wasn't just because of the boy, it was Kayla too. There was something about her resilience, her gentleness under pressure, her ability to love without asking for anything in return, that pierced straight through the frozen parts of him. He didn't want to feel this. He didn't ask for it. But now that it was growing inside him, he didn't know how to stop it. In the days that followed, Andrew's legal team moved swiftly to push Alexander's transfer through the system. It was delicate. They had to prove he posed an emotional threat without raising suspicion of internal retaliation. Meanwhile, Andrew started sleeping with his phone on the pillow beside him, always on silent, but always ready in case Kayla needed him. Their interactions, though brief and always framed by propriety, had become more layered. When their hands brushed while passing a toy, neither pulled away immediately. When their eyes met across the room, they lingered a second longer than necessary. Still, Andrew remained guarded. He couldn't afford to cross lines, not yet. Not when danger still loomed. And yet, he found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, noticing the way her laughter brought warmth to the walls, observing how she tucked Lien into bed like a mother would, whispering gentle prayers over his sleep. Each night, Andrew sat a few feet outside Lien's room, pretending to work on his laptop, when in truth, he was simply listening. Listening to a world he thought he had lost forever. But the situation escalated. Alexander managed to sneak a call into the mansion one stormy evening. Lien answered it before the butler could intervene. The voice on the other end was low, dark, and deliberate. "You miss me, kid. Bet the new guy doesn't know how to protect you like I can." The words were venom. Lien, confused and scared, ran straight to Kayla, trembling and clutching his bunny. When Andrew returned from a late board meeting and saw Kayla holding a pail, shivering Lien in her arms, something inside him erupted. He took the phone from the butler's hand, redialed the number, and left a message so calm, so icy, it chilled even Kayla's blood. "You're done. Touch their peace again, and I'll bury you in so much legal hell you'll pray for silence." The next morning, Alexander was relocated under maximum security, forbidden any form of communication with the outside. Andrew ensured every channel was sealed. But the damage lingered. Lien refused to sleep alone for days. Kayla's light dimmed. One night, unable to sleep, Andrew walked past the hallway to the guest quarters and noticed the door slightly ajar. Kayla was on the balcony, sitting on the swing, knees pulled close, staring into the dark. She didn't see him, or maybe she did but didn't care anymore. She looked small, tired, and heartbreakingly alone. He hesitated, then approached. No tailored speech, no practiced lines. Just raw humanity. "Why don't you come inside? It's cold." She looked at him with eyes that carried years of disappointment and too many dreams buried too early. "Sometimes I sit here and wonder," she said softly, "if this is all I get. If this is the closest I'll ever come to the family I always prayed for." Her voice cracked, but she kept her composure. Andrew sat beside her, unsure of the rules now. Her vulnerability disarmed him. "You already are part of this family," he said, surprising even himself. "You just don't see it yet." That was the first night they truly talked. No filters. No boundaries. Kayla shared how she had grown up in foster homes, how she used to imagine a house with warm lighting, a little boy to read stories to, a husband who'd call her "my peace." But reality had been cruel. Andrew, in turn, confessed things he had never told anyone. That sometimes he still reached for the other side of the bed. That Suzanne's perfume still lingered in the back of his closet. That every smile he gave the world was rehearsed. That he was afraid, terrified, that by moving forward, he was burying the last piece of the woman he had loved so deeply. "You're not burying her," Kayla said, placing her hand over his. "You're learning to live again. And she would want that for you." The silence after her words wasn't awkward. It was sacred. And for the first time since Suzanne's death, Andrew allowed himself to cry. Not out of grief, but out of relief. Because maybe, just maybe, love wasn't over. Maybe it was beginning again. The following days were lighter. Lien slowly regained his appetite and started smiling again. He began calling Andrew Daddy more often, and even asked if Kayla could sleep closer to his room. Andrew noticed the change in himself too. He laughed. He listened. He started arriving home earlier. At work, his partners were baffled by his softened tone and his sudden insistence on leaving meetings early. The cold tycoon was melting. One evening, as Kayla painted with Lien in the garden, Andrew stood watching them from the window. It was a scene so ordinary and so sacred that it filled his chest with something that hurt and healed all at once. Oh. But as soon as he felt it, the guilt crept back in. That night, Suzanne's face haunted his dreams again. Only this time she was silent, watching, walking away slowly. Andrew woke in a cold sweat, unsure if it was a warning or a blessing. The next weekend, Andrew decided to cancel his business trip to Chicago, something he hadn't done in over a decade. The reason? Lien had asked if he could stay home, just this once, to help build a cardboard castle in the garden with Kayla. Andrew didn't even pause to check his calendar. He said yes, shocking his assistant and his entire board of directors. That Saturday morning, dressed in jeans and a soft navy sweater, Andrew knelt in the grass beside his son, holding tape and crayons while Kayla directed the construction like a cheerful architect of childhood dreams. Lien laughed until he hiccuped, smearing paint on Andrew's nose and calling him Sir Night Daddy. It was messy, loud, imperfect, and it was the most alive Andrew had felt in years. For a moment, He looked up from the cardboard fortress and caught Kayla staring at him. Not the powerful CEO. Not the grieving widower. Just a man. And in that look, he saw no pity, no hesitation. Only a gentle admiration that made his chest ache with both fear and desire. Later that afternoon, Lien fell asleep under a blanket on the porch swing, a paper crown tilted on his head. Kayla and Andrew remained nearby, sipping lemonade, neither in a rush to break the moment. There was a silence between them that wasn't heavy. It was full of unsaid things, the kind of silence that happens when souls recognize each other but are too scared to speak aloud what the heart is already screaming. Andrew cleared his throat, his voice more vulnerable than he intended. "He's happy with you, you know." Kayla looked down, then back at him. "He's happy with you, Andrew. He just needed you to remember how to be a father." That struck deep. 'Cause it was true. And because, somehow, Kayla wasn't just helping Lien heal, she was helping him heal too. And that terrified Andrew more than anything. Terrified him because it meant letting go of Suzanne's ghost. And he wasn't sure he was ready to do that. Not yet. But maybe soon. That night, the nightmares came back. Suzanne standing at the foot of the bed, her face soft but unreadable. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. But she kept turning away. Andrew reached for her, but his hands went through mist. He woke up drenched in sweat, breath ragged, the memory of her perfume still lingering. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands trembling. Why now? Why, when he was just starting to feel like a father again? Like a man again? He didn't want to forget her. He didn't want to move on if it meant erasing her. So why did it feel like loving Kayla was the only thing that made sense anymore? He walked downstairs barefoot, needing air. But when he reached the hallway, he stopped. Kayla's door was ajar. She was sitting on the floor, wrapping a late birthday gift for Lien, a scrapbook she had handmade, filled with photos, drawings, and small pressed flowers. She looked up, surprised but not startled. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. Andrew hesitated, then nodded. "I saw her again." Kayla didn't ask who. She knew. She simply opened her arms. And for the first time, he let himself fall into them. Their embrace wasn't passionate. It wasn't desperate. It was quiet and full of pain and softness, the kind of touch that says, "I see your ghosts and I'm not afraid of them." He didn't kiss her. He just rested his forehead against hers, their breathing slowly sinking, hearts speaking through silence. Kayla whispered, "You don't have to forget her, but you can still live." And for a man who had mastered the art of surviving, those words hit harder than any business loss or personal betrayal. He stayed there a while, holding her, allowing himself to feel the fullness of what was happening. This wasn't a flirtation. This wasn't loneliness. This wasn't a passing comfort. This was love, reborn through fire and grief and tenderness. And it terrified him. But it also anchored him. He whispered, "Don't go anywhere." And Kayla, smiling with tears in her eyes, said, "I've been right here all along." A few days later, Lien came down with a fever. At first, Kayla assumed it was a cold, but as his temperature rose rapidly and he began trembling in his sleep, panic set in. Andrew was on a Zoom call with an international investor when Kayla burst into his office without knocking, holding Lien in her arms. "Something's wrong." That's all she had to say. Andrew didn't finish his sentence. He was in the car with them 5 minutes later, driving like a madman to the nearest children's hospital. The doctors ran tests. Kayla didn't leave Lien's side for a second. Andrew sat outside the room, pacing like a caged animal. His mind spiraled. What if it was something serious? What if he lost Lien too? What if this time life didn't give him a second chance? The hours dragged. When the pediatrician finally emerged, he smiled reassuringly. "It's a viral infection. Scary but manageable. He'll recover fully with rest." Andrew collapsed into the chair, burying his face in his hands. Kayla placed a hand on his back, and he didn't push it away. He needed her there, more than ever. Back at home, with Lien asleep and stable, Andrew poured himself a glass of scotch and stood at the balcony, staring at the sky. Kayla joined him, arms crossed against the breeze. "I thought I'd lost him," he whispered. "And I realized I can't. I can't lose you too." It wasn't a confession. It was a surrender. A surrender to something bigger than grief. Bigger than fear. She looked at him, eyes soft, and replied, "Then stop pretending you don't love us." And just like that, the air changed. The distance shrank. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was electric. Andrew stepped closer. Kayla didn't move. They were inches apart, breathing the same air, hearts pounding in chaotic harmony. But instead of a kiss, he brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and whispered, "Let me try. I don't know how to love right anymore. But let me try." And she nodded, eyes glistening. "You're already doing it." The next morning, Lien, still a bit groggy, looked up from his cereal and said, "Daddy, can Kayla be part of our family forever?" Andrew and Kayla froze. Their eyes met, and this time the look was clear. There was no going back. Not after this. And just as Andrew was about to respond, a soft knock came at the front door. The butler opened it, revealing a uniformed officer. "I'm sorry to disturb you, Mr. Clark, but you'll want to see this." In his hands was a letter. Another one. From Alexander. Smuggled out from the prison. Addressed to Kayla. The past wasn't done with them yet. Andrew took the letter with a sinking feeling in his chest. A cold chill crawling up his spine as he stared at Kayla's name scrawled in jagged, desperate handwriting across the envelope. He thanked the officer and dismissed the staff before slowly walking back inside, where Kayla stood frozen, holding Lien's bowl of cereal with trembling fingers. He handed her the letter without a word, but she didn't take it. "Open it," she whispered. Andrew tore the envelope with controlled rage, his fingers white from the tension. Inside, Alexander's words were venomous, a stream of threats disguised as twisted love declarations. He knew things he shouldn't know. What Lien had worn to the park, the day Kayla had braided his hair, even the song Andrew hummed when rocking the boy to sleep. "You think you've taken my place," the letter ended. "But the story's not over. He'll never be your son. And she'll never stop loving me." Andrew looked up, eyes blazing, jaw clenched. "This ends now." Within 24 hours, Andrew had his legal team, the FBI, and 2 private investigators digging into how Alexander had been communicating from prison. A guard was bribed. A burner phone had been found. And worst of all, he had been planning to request a transfer back to their state, citing mental rehabilitation and proximity to family. Andrew pulled every string he had, made every call he could, and within 2 days, Alexander was relocated to a maximum security penitentiary 3 states away with 0 communication privileges. It should have brought relief, but the damage had already been done. Kayla couldn't sleep, constantly checking the locks, glancing over her shoulder. Lien was having nightmares again, crying out for Mama Kayla in his sleep. And Andrew was drowning in guilt. For letting it get this far. For not protecting them sooner. For realizing with painful clarity that losing Kayla and Lien would destroy him in ways even Suzanne's death hadn't. Because this wasn't just about the past. It was about everything he was finally willing to build. One night, as the wind howled outside and the rain painted soft trails on the windows, Andrew found Kayla curled up on the porch swing, hugging a blanket tightly to her chest. She looked like a woman unraveling, like someone who had held it together for too long. "Tell me what to do," he said softly, kneeling before her. "Tell me how to make this better." Kayla shook her head, tears spilling silently. "I don't need you to fix it, Andrew. I just need to know this is real. That I'm not dreaming. That after all this pain, I'm not going to wake up and find myself alone again." He took her hands, pressing them to his heart. "This is real. I don't know how to do love the way you deserve. But I feel it. Every moment. Every time you smile at Lien. Every time you laugh at my awkward jokes. Every time I see you looking at me like I'm more than my grief." The rain intensified, thunder rumbling in the distance. But inside that little moment between them, everything was still. And then finally, Andrew leaned in and kissed her. Slowly, reverently, like someone saying thank you for saving him from himself. From that night on, everything shifted. They didn't rush things. There was no grand announcement, no sudden change in how they lived. But there were glances held longer, brushes of hands in the hallway, soft whispers in the kitchen. And Lien, with his childlike intuition, began drawing pictures of the 3 of them under a sun with big smiley faces, labeling them, Daddy, Mama Kayla, and me. One morning, while Kayla was reading to Lien in the garden, Andrew watched them from the window, coffee in hand, and something clicked deep inside him. He wasn't afraid anymore. Not of ghosts, not of judgment, not even of losing again. Because now he knew. Suzanne had been his past, but Kayla was his future. A few days later, he called his sister, the only person who had been close to him after Suzanne's death. "I think I've fallen in love again," he admitted. She paused, then smiled through the phone. "Good. It's about damn time." But fate wasn't quite done with them yet. Kayla had been feeling dizzy for days, nauseated and exhausted. At first, she brushed it off as stress, lack of sleep, maybe nerves. But when she fainted one morning while helping Lien tie his shoes, Andrew rushed her to the hospital, his heart in his throat. They waited in the emergency room, holding hands, trying not to panic. The doctor arrived with a gentle smile. "Congratulations. You're pregnant." The world went silent. Kayla blinked, stunned. Andrew felt the breath leave his lungs. He didn't speak for several seconds. Then, with trembling hands, he reached for her, pulling her into his chest. "We're going to be okay," he whispered. "I promise you." But deep down, a storm had already begun to brew. The past was knocking again, and it wasn't going to leave without a fight. That night, alone in their room, Andrew couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, reliving Suzanne's final hours, the look in her eyes when she realized she wouldn't meet her son. Panic, the helplessness, the sheer terror of it all. And now it was happening again. What if Kayla suffered the same fate? What if history repeated itself? What if he was destined to lose everyone he ever dared to love? He got out of bed and walked to the nursery, sitting beside Lien, who stirred slightly in his sleep and murmured, "Daddy loves you." Andrew choked on a sob. He did. More than anything. And now he was going to be a father again. But this time, he wasn't going to let fear steal his joy. He wasn't going to run. He was going to fight for Kayla, for their baby, for the family he thought he'd never have. He looked out the window, the stars shining bright above the dark sky, and whispered into the night, "Please, just let me keep them." Before we reach the final chapter of this unforgettable journey, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. It's how you stay with us for the next stories. Stories of love, loss, hope, and redemption. If this tale has touched your heart so far, leave a like and let us know what kind of story you'd love to hear next. Now breathe in. We're almost there. Kayla's pregnancy moved forward with apparent calm, but inside Andrew, the storm never really stopped raging. He attended every appointment, studied every medical term, demanded the best obstetricians be flown in to care for her, and converted an entire wing of the Clark mansion into a private medical suite equipped with the latest technology and 2 full-time nurses. Kayla tried to ease his fear, often saying she felt strong and healthy, that her body was ready, and this baby would arrive in peace. But Andrew's eyes never truly rested. Each time the ultrasound machine echoed with the rhythmic beat of a tiny heart. He remembered the day that sound fell silent in the room where Suzanne had taken her last breath. And though he loved Kayla with all he had, joy still felt dangerous. Even so, despite the fear, he remained present. When Kayla had nausea at midnight, he made her tea. When she wept quietly at dusk, he simply held her hand. In that quiet love, Andrew discovered a truth. Kayla was not a replacement. She was a beginning. In the 8th month, a terrifying scare, Kayla experienced intense pain and bleeding. Andrew rushed her to the hospital, unable to hide the panic on his face. Lien stayed with Andrew's sister, confused, asking over and over when Mommy Kayla would come back. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed signs of preeclampsia and said the baby would need to come early. Andrew sat beside Kayla in the delivery prep room, trembling, his voice broken. "If anything happens to you," he began, but Kayla gently pressed her finger to his lips. "Don't say that. Nothing's going to happen. Not now. Not to us." He tried to smile, but the tears betrayed him. She pulled him close, touched her forehead to his and whispered, "You taught me love can survive the worst. But now it's time to let it live its best. Trust me." And for the first time since Suzanne's death, Andrew felt a fragile, flickering faith. Because this wasn't the same story. Hours later, the newborn's cry filled the corridors. Strong, fierce, alive. Andrew collapsed into sobs. his hands trembling as he held his daughter for the first time. She had Kayla's eyes and Lien's quiet spirit. Kayla, exhausted but radiant, opened her arms. "Bring me our girl, Andrew." And he did. Eyes soaked, heart unarmored. They named her Hope. Because that's what she was. The promise that life gives love another chance. Fear didn't vanish, but it softened, faded into the background, like a distant storm after the sun returns. Lien met his sister the next day, holding a teddy bear and a sentence he'd practiced. "Hi, Hope. I'm your big brother. I promise to protect you. Just like Daddy protects Mommy." And once again they all cried. 'Cause it was real. It was truth. It was family. 6 months later, on a blooming spring morning, Andrew and Kayla were married in the mansion's garden. The altar was built beneath the apple tree where Lien often played, surrounded by white and lavender flowers. Kayla wore a simple but stunning dress. Lien carried the rings, his grin wider than his face. Andrew couldn't stop staring, like he still couldn't believe it. The officiant spoke, but Andrew barely heard the words. All he saw was Kayla's laughter, her eyes full of light, the way she looked at him like he was worth loving. When it came time for vows, Kayla said, "You saved me, Andrew. Not with money, but with kindness, with quiet, with space to breathe. Thank you for not giving up on love." Andrew answered, "You brought me back from the dead, Kayla. There is no life for me without you." When the kiss finally came, Lien shouted, "Just kiss already, Dad." And they all laughed. The laughter of healing. Home. But the story held one last surprise. Days after the wedding, while sorting boxes in the guest room, Kayla found an old envelope hidden behind a shelf. It was a letter from Suzanne, written just weeks before she passed, never opened. Hands trembling, Andrew read it. In it, Suzanne said goodbye. Not with fear, but with a heart full of love. "If one day you meet someone who makes the sun rise again, don't run. Love isn't betrayal. It's survival. Lien needs it. And so do you. Love you. I free you to love again." Andrew dropped to his knees, overcome. Kayla wrapped her arms around him from behind as he wept. Not from guilt this time, but from release. From permission. From peace. For the first time, he cried for Suzanne with gratitude. And without shame. Today Lien is 7. Hope is almost 3. The Clark household is full of toys, noise, meals made together, and music that plays through open windows. On warm afternoons, Andrew and Kayla sit on the porch swing where everything began. Hope rests in Kayla's lap. Lien leans against his father's knee, listening to the story of how his parents met. Andrew no longer has nightmares. Kayla still smiles like spring after winter. And on the walls, family photos mix Suzanne's memory with Kayla's joy, with Lien's brightness and Hope's future. It's a family stitched with scars, with second chances, with a love that did not ask for perfection, but chose to stay. Because real love isn't about forgetting the past. It's about building something brave in spite of it. And if you've listened this far, remember, this story isn't just fiction. It's a mirror. Maybe you've been broken. Maybe you think love passed you by. But love doesn't expire. Wait. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it crashes in. But when it comes to heal. Andrew thought he'd never smile again. Kayla thought the perfect family didn't exist. Lien thought he'd only ever remember. But they were wrong. Life, after all, still holds miracles for those who dare to believe again.